I'm going to cover the key things you need to have in your lab notebook come Monday. Up to this point, you've had your objectives, you had your modified procedure, and you have your data table that you put in during the lab. The focus, really keep in mind the data table needs to be neatly arranged, tabular form. You either copied the data table from the lab sheet or taped it in. You always want to make sure key things that come in all the labs, all the graphs and data tables, make sure that you use a ruler and you label everything. Calculations. Watch the video for the calculations. You're going to show all calculations, key things. Make sure that you label every time you're calculating something. It has a title. Title with an underline would actually be good. Make sure it's organized. You want to have the setup, including the units, plug in the numbers. The other thing is you're going to show area calculations later on in the section. Under the error section, but the biggest thing is make sure that it's organized and labeled. Next thing is a simple conclusion. This is basically whether or not you achieved your objective. We had two objectives in this lab. One was to calculate R, the other one was to find the molar volume of a gas. You would write one or two sentences specifically stating what those values were when you calculated them. So you would actually list them. You would say the calculated value for R in our lab, let's say you got 0.092 or whatever it was, you would list that in that section. Next section is called the discussion of theory. This is where you basically connect what you did in the lab to something that we studied. The idea is whenever we do a lab in chemistry class, it should relate back to some concept that we dealt with or some section in the book. What does the experiment have to do with any theory that we learned in class? So it should be about roughly a paragraph comparing it back to things that we've learned already. Next section is experimental sources of error. This is where you have any discussions. You have a writing section on this, couple sentences if you have any sort of error, you notice any sort of error during your lab. The other thing is you would calculate percent error in this section. Since we know the accepted value, for example, R is 0.0821, you would use that and calculate your error there. You also know the molar volume of a gas is 22.4 liters, so you'd also use that in your calculations. Finally, in your lab book, you would do any post-lab questions. In this lab, there are no post-lab questions that you really have to answer. You just have to do the calculations. You can watch the other video on YouTube, which will take you step by step. Make sure everything's neat, labeled, and titled. That's the biggest thing. Is the easier it is for me to find, the better grade you're going to get. Alright? Watch the video, do all the calculations, and I'll see you on Monday. Have a good weekend.